Well, I'm the guy that goes through the key sources and to see where scholars are today. If I'm going to tell you where scholars are across the board, I kind of have to have an idea where they're hanging out. And in the literature, this is hard to imagine. In the critical literature, I found over 20 reasons to believe in an empty tomb. Over 20. You think, really? I mean, where do you get that kind of thing? But critics are convinced, at least if you go by the times they mention it most, that the best reason to believe in the empty tomb is because the women are reported as witnesses. Now, here's how it works. If I'm faking a gospel, or half faking, half telling the truth, and I don't mean I'm a liar, that's way too simple. I'm telling a story about this great man, and I just kind of fill in the blanks with things that I've heard, and I don't know what goes in there. And I'm writing this a few decades later. When I get to the important part, central part about an empty tomb, when we're getting up to appearances, I don't pick women as my witnesses, because it's not true that women couldn't testify in a court of law. They could. But there's an inverse relation between how important the subject matter was and whether you would use women witnesses. Maybe it's all you have. And in this case, at least at the beginning, until the disciples go there and who knows who else, that's all we have. So why is it that four gospel writers, now they're not just down the block from each other, right? They're in different parts of the Roman Empire. As they're telling the story, why do they all commit this sort of faux pas and say, the women did it? Why wouldn't you say, well, I'm pretty free to tell this story. I think I heard someone say, Peter and John went there. Okay, well, that's later in the accounts, but let's make them go there at the beginning. Or let's just say I misunderstood. I thought Peter and John were with the women, and they went early in the morning. I mean, I'm looking to get the guys in that story. There's not a single man in the original trip to the tomb. How come it's told that way 4 times, different parts of the empire? Because there wasn't a single guy in the group. I mean, that's just an impressive reason. You don't put your worst foot forward unless you're trying to tell the truth. Another key reason is the story's told in Jerusalem. Where does the preaching start? Jerusalem. Where's the empty tomb? Jerusalem. How was the tomb again? Empty. Well, as skeptics sometimes say, come on, your book Acts says that they don't start preaching for 50 days. You couldn't tell who the person was after 50 days. And I'd respond, that's not the teaching. That's not the text. That's not what it says. You have to do justice to what the text says. And here's what the text says. It's empty. Not, there's a body in the tomb, don't mind him, we don't know who he is anyway. Nobody's in the tomb. If there's a body in the tomb, the preaching is false. The New Testament is empty tomb, no tomb. I mean, nobody buried in the tomb. And so the fact that it was preached in Jerusalem, where anybody could get there easily on an afternoon walk and prove it or disprove it, it only works if there's no body in the tomb, i.e. empty. A third good reason is again, critics look for different sources, different, 2 heads are better than one. And they're not agreed. But of the 5 sources that I outlined for the Gospels, they believe that we have 3 to 4 are independent, admitting the empty tomb. That's 3 out of 4 out of a 5 max. That's a pretty good indication. Those are 3. There's a number of other indications. I think they're the best ones. The women, the fact that it was preached geographically in the place that it could most readily be refuted, and the fact that we have several sources, independent sources for the empty tomb.